done. Ladies and gentlemen, I just pretended to finish my first draft. What should you do right after you finish your first draft? Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Other Epic Story. This is a vlog where I talk about different writing techniques and try to apply it to my own work. So, you finished your first draft, and congratulations. It is not easy to do, despite what other people will tell you. The first draft is always easy. First draft is hard, but you know what's harder? Literally everything that comes after. I know this because I have so many first drafts of stuff. And today's episode is what do you do after you finish your first draft? Then we're going to look at what a first draft is supposed to look like. Lastly, I'm going to read a bit from my first chapter. That's right, how exciting for all of you. We're going to actually get into the book. So, good job writing the first draft. I know it must have been torturous, absolutely agonizing to get all that idea in your head onto a piece of paper. I know, every day, I know. So what's next? Well, let's take a deep breath. Just go out, grab a drink, celebrate, forget about the novel for a bit. Put it aside, let it marinate, and then come back to it with a fresh, objective perspective of it. That way you could be more critical of it without it feeling super precious. If you finish the last line and you go immediately back to the beginning and you start editing it, you're still living in that world. You're still in writer's mode. You're not in editor's mode. And that can affect how objective you can be on your writing. It's really hard to edit your own work because you remember the sweat, blood, and tear you put into that paragraph. So the idea of cutting it right then and there is just so agonizing. You won't do it, and it continues being not the best piece of work it could be, and the second draft ends up being a grammatical correction of your first one instead of a more stylistic, structural edit. That's how I found it. If you go on any forum, you can find conversation of how long people usually wait before they go back and edit their first draft. It could be anywhere from a few weeks to a few months to a few years. It's really up to you to decide when you're ready to go back to it. I hate referencing Stephen King all the time, but he's literally the only writer I know, so I'm gonna reference him again. In his autobiographical book on writing, Stephen King talks about his first draft sort of process. It takes him about a season to write the first draft, and then he lets it sit for 6 weeks before going back to it. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. So in 1 year, you could have 4 manuscripts written and 2 of them will be edited. So you're done your first draft, let it rest, go off, read some more books, write something completely different, pretty much reboot your whole system and get ready to go into editor's mode. So I'm gonna do a little show and tell now. I got here 2 manuscripts from my past. This one here is my first draft of my epic novel. Can't believe I still have this. I wrote this in September 2011. I finished the first draft on February 2012. So it took me about a season to write, a little bit more, probably 2 seasons. But then as you can see here underneath, I started editing it October 13th, 2012. So I waited from February 2012 to October 13th, 2012. So that's about 8 months. That's a good amount of time. It's 2018 now. I finished that in 2012, but in 2014, I went back and I did another edit of my manuscript. And so this ended up being the 3rd draft of my novel. And that's the one we'll be actually reading from today. Not my first draft, Not my second draft, but my third draft. But it really does feel like the first draft still, because back then, I don't know if I edited properly or not. I'm pretty sure I just went back, made some grammatical changes, and called it editing. But that's not what we're doing here. I'm trying to expand on the characters, expand on the plot, eliminate any plot holes, and tell the most encapsulating story I can. Yeah, let's keep rolling with it. I'm gonna read maybe the first few paragraphs of the first chapter, and then we'll keep it going from there. This is actually pretty exciting. I haven't gone back and revisited my work in a long time, so this is pretty cool. I want to preface this before I start. I had a lot of trouble coming up with the title of this whole project and also the names of the different towns and location and region, and that is something I want to explore a little more later on. But in order to keep the ball rolling, I just named all the cities and towns after alcoholic beverages. Go figure. And so we begin. Chapter 1. Jin was built upon a wasteland between a mountain range and a vast emptiness. It was the last prosperous district in the Fallings, but still had little to relish. Yet the proud people were not discouraged by the poverty. They counted their blessings and continued toiling away upon the fields, shops, and areas of unfinished labor. Those that called Jin home found mirth and entertainment in the most humble methods. Even the elders would not be able to remember the last festivities or banquet. Those activities were too extravagant. Everyone knew that in order for their home to remain self-sufficient, they could not dabble in those wasteful nights of pleasure. So, at the end of a long day of exertion, the hard-working Jin folk would return home, humbled by their uncomfortable seat. They would throw the legs up and feed upon the food they portioned well in advance. They would drink the distilled ale to stay healthy enough to toil another day. They would rest their heads on rough tattered beds and dream of a fantastical world where they would not succumb to fatigue. Then, they could continue to profit throughout the night. The citizens of Jin do not praise themselves for their work ethics. The unforgiving land had turned the men and women into rough and ragged tools. From afar, it appears as though they still function as human beings. Their arms still pushed and pulled, their legs still skipped and hopped, their mouth still spoke and sung. But up close, they were defeated creatures, tamed by the world they lived on. As they marched across the field, carrying bunches of wheat in their arms, they resembled marionette puppets, held up by a thin string. They looked far too fragile to move without the help of something from above. Their frail exterior was not an illusion. Jin was at the mercy of the next disaster. The inevitable was bound to do to the little town what it has done to so many others. A night of strong winds could knock roofs off the houses. A heavy storm could wash away all the stock. A lightning bolt could set the whole neighborhood on fire. All those things could clean the slate. But those who worried did not worry about nature's wrath, for every member of Jin had something more dire to concern with. It's actually really weird reading this, and it's just all just coming back to me, all the ideas that I had before. I haven't read this since 2014. That's 4 years ago I haven't read this. Really haven't even thought about this until I started this project maybe a little over a month ago. It's both refreshing and also a little bit, you could have done so much better. But I think that's the experience you should have reading your own work for the first time in a while, especially if it's an unpolished piece. I tried to polish it in 2012. I tried again in 2014. Now, with this whole project sort of built around me, I hope to do a better job at the end of this. And god damn it, I will. Either way, I took up enough time from you today, and I really appreciate it. I'd love to hear more about how you prepare for writing your second draft or editing your first draft. I'd love to hear from you. All the best. Keep writing, keep editing, keep reading, keep